Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back here to another edition of the Fishing Teacher, and much appreciated everybody taking some time to check the video out. And I'd like to invite everybody to subscribe to the channel if you hadn't a chance to. That'd be much appreciated. Okay, guys, today we're going to continue our series talking about environmental conditions as far as how they affect fish, and we're going to talk about wind. We've talked in the past few days about water temperature, clarity, currents, all that type of stuff. And wind is another factor, a huge factor in fishing that determines not only, how active or how aggressive the fish are going to be, but it also determines technique. So first of all, wind is something that you're going to have to deal with all the time. And, whether it be a lack of wind completely or a medium wind or a windy day, it's just like, it's part of fishing. A lot of times we all cuss it, if it's too windy, but nevertheless, the fish will behave in certain ways, and you need to be able to take advantage of it regardless of what it is. So I want to give you guys a sort of a foundational approach. And like we talked about before, a lot of this stuff we talk about, whether it be water temperature, water clarity, current, all that stuff, there's a ton of like subtleties within that we'll do other videos on. But in this video, I just want to give you a basic foundation if you're not real familiar with what wind does to fish. So there's a lot of factors in correlation with wind that determines, how wind affects fish, because the wind and what it does to fish, it also depends on what the water temperature is and what the water clarity is in relationship to that wind. Basically, what you're going to have in most situations is wind can be a positive thing, because what happens is wind tends to disturb the surface of the water, and when that water surface is disturbed by some wind, the fish are a little bit more relaxed. They become a little bit more aggressive because they're not quite as aware. Now, you can imagine, say for example, if you were a fish that's in a swimming pool, and that swimming pool is just glass calm like that, those fish, like I said, they can see very well towards the surface, and they're not as secure because there's not the lack of wind doesn't provide them any type of overhead cover. Now, if you put some ripples on, say for example, you have people splashing around in that pool or whatever, and the water's sloshing everywhere, that then for whatever reason, those fish, they become more secure, they become a little bit more aggressive, and they bite more. They're just not quite as wary if you have wind. It's the same with like if you have a cloudy or rainy day, the fish usually bite better on a cloudy, rainy day, and it's the same if you have a little bit of wind. Now, the degree of wind that you have has a lot to do with the water clarity and the water temperature combined. For the most part, what you're going to find is on the lakes that have the clear, warmer water, the heavier wind is going to be better. It's like if you have, say, water visibility of like 4 or 5 feet in the area you're fishing, and the water temperatures are like over 70 degrees, if you have a wind of like maybe 15 miles an hour or 20 miles an hour, that can be a really positive thing, because in clear water, those fish are extremely spooky, and a hard wind really makes them a little bit more aggressive. It sort of acts as cover to them, and it sort of goes down from there. It's like as the water clarity and the water temperature drops a little bit, then a little bit of a breeze is good, but you don't want quite as much wind. So for example, if you got 2 foot of visibility in the water you're fishing and the water 60 degrees, then like a 10 mile an hour wind may be really good. And then if you've got like 1.5 feet of visibility and that water temperature is down in the 50s, maybe just a little bit of a ripple on the water, just a little 5 mile an hour wind is going to be good. So that's one of the more complicated aspects in fishing, is to sort of get a feel of how much wind is the best for those conditions, combined with the water clarity and the water temperature. Now, for the most part, here's what wind does. It's like the windier the days that you have, the more that you can fish what I call reaction baits. Now, reaction bait is something that you throw out and you're reeling through the water. It's something like a spinner bait, a crankbait, a topwater, a swim bait, something that's coming through the water at a fairly a good clip at a horizontal plane like this. Anytime you have wind, that makes those type of lures categories better. And if you lose that wind, say for example, if you've got a calm day or not much wind at all, a lot of times those reaction baits they're not as productive, and your slower baits are going to work better at that time, like your jigs and your plastic worms, something you can work on the bottom. I'll give you guys a prime example of wind, how it affects that. I just got back from fishing at my first tournament down at Table Rock Lake last weekend. Now, in practice, we had like 15-mile-an-hour wind. The water visibility was like probably 3 feet or so where I was fishing, and about a 10 to 15-mile-an-hour wind. And I was catching a lot of fish on a crankbait. You know, I was fishing these rocky banks that had, you know, some wind coming in on it, and they were biting a crankbait really good. I was catching quite a few fish. The day of the tournament came, the very next day, and we lost all of our wind. It just got completely calm. There wasn't a puff of wind anywhere, and I couldn't hardly catch a fish on a crankbait. I caught one fish on a crankbait all day long, and the day before that, I was catching like, you know, 25 or 30 on a crankbait, and just that lack of wind made all the difference. Now, those fish were still there probably, but for whatever reason, the lack of wind made them turn off to that type of aggressive reaction bait. I should have slowed down and went to something slow, but I was too hard-headed and didn't do that. So that's a good example of wind on there. Another thing that little bit of information I'll give you guys with wind here is the direction of the wind and the speed of the wind. I have found it's better to cast with the wind as far as, you know, casting, if you have the option of whether to cast into the wind or with the wind. If you cast with the wind, it's easier to make a longer cast. I think your lures look more natural coming through the water. If you're in a boat, you can go a lot quieter if you go with the wind. And if you're fighting the wind, if you're casting into the wind, you can't cast as far, you can't keep as good a contact with your bait, and you've got to stay on your trolling motor more, which creates more noise. So most of the time I like to fish with the wind, unless the wind is just like minimal where it doesn't make much difference at all. But anyway, guys, that's just some overall foundations. In general, you do want some wind. My ideal condition as far as wind is I like enough wind to break up the surface where there's no calm, flat areas on the water. I want some type of a break on the surface, and that seems to always help out regardless of the water temperature or the water clarity. And again, you know, when you get into various clarities and water temperatures like that, different type of winds are going to play a bigger role, which we'll get into in future videos. So anyway, guys, hope that helps out, and thanks for tuning in. We'll be back later. See you.